Hey, everybody.
Thanks for tuning in to the Hanging On to Hope podcast.
I'm Brenda J.
And I'm Karen Wonder.
And we are HangingOnToHope.org.
This podcast is intended as educational and is not psychological or medical advice. Always consult a professional when needed, and we disclaim any liability in connection with the instruction, information, or advice given. Thanks for tuning in to the Hanging On to Hope podcast. This is Karen W. On today's podcast, we welcome back F Remy Diederich. He is a pastor, author, and church consultant. He's authored 6 books and offers workshops and retreats upon request. Today, we are talking about his book, Healing the Hurts of Your Past, a guide to overcoming the pain of shame. So welcome back to the show.
Hey, it's so nice to be back. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Thank you for talking about this important subject. So shame declares you to be worthless. It distorts how we perceive almost everything in life, especially ourselves. Shame binds, numbs, disconnects, and destroys. Nothing seems to erase the ever-present feelings of worthlessness. Many people confuse guilt with shame. You say guilt comes from feeling bad about what you've done, while shame comes from feeling bad about who you are. Anything more you want to add to that definition?
Well, yeah, I do. It's always good to define terms right away so you can be clear about what we're talking about. And I like to differentiate the word shame from feeling ashamed, because to be ashamed means that you feel remorse for something that you've done. The dictionary, I looked it up, it says that to be ashamed means that you feel guilty or you feel embarrassed for something that you've done wrong. And that's a good thing. But shame has to do with your identity. Guilt says, I did something wrong, but shame says, I am something wrong. So the good news is I can do something about my guilt. I can correct my error. I can ask for forgiveness. I can make changes. But if I am something wrong, well, then I don't have any hope. And so shame is inherently condemning. And that's just why it's so destructive.
So I was actually very encouraged when I took your shame quiz that you had in your book, because when I went through Mending the Soul, the very first time I went through it, shame was it was a huge issue. That whole chapter was just, it was underlined and highlighted, and that was definitely my issue.
Sure.
But in taking your quiz, I was encouraged because it just showed me that I've had some healing from shame. I still struggle. I think everyone does to some extent, but I definitely could see that I'd made some progress, which made me encouraged. So we thought it might be helpful to our listeners to ask the questions on your shame quiz. So number 1, do you have difficulty lingering feelings of guilt when asking forgiveness?
Well, and that is, you can't separate yourself from an action. You let your past actions define who you are.
Okay. Number 2, do you feel uncomfortable when others are having fun?
And people sometimes feel uncomfortable because they don't think that they deserve to have fun, or they're afraid that they won't do the fun in the right way that the other people are having it. So they get very self-conscious.
Okay. Number 3, when you are hurt or angry, do you automatically experience guilt?
And they feel guilty because they don't think they have the right to experience those emotions, the emotion of hurt or the emotion of anger.
Number 4, is it hard for you to tell others how you're feeling for fear of how you think they will think of you?
No extra comment there.
Okay. And number 5, do you feel embarrassed when you get success?
This relates to what people call the imposter syndrome. And that's where people assume their success was some big mistake. They don't think they deserve success or are even capable of being successful. You're afraid people will look at your success and wonder how that was even possible, because you're just so convinced that they see you as a big loser.
Wow.
Okay. And then number 6, is it hard for you to relax or have fun?
It's hard to have fun because you feel responsible for others to relax and have fun. If you relax, people might think poorly of you. That is, you feel the need to always perform, always keep people happy, always be pleasing people.
Okay. Number 7, do you want to withdraw when you feel hurt or have done something wrong? That's a big one.
And people, when people feel this way, they withdraw because it's hard for them to face up to what just happened. Whether they're hurt or whether they've done something wrong, they feel indicted in their inadequacy and they just don't want to face the moments. They walk away.
Okay. Number 8, do you feel God is a stern judge you will never be able to please? And I think that's another big one.
Yeah. In other words, you feel like God is always watching you and you're never going to make him happy.
Yeah. Number 9, do you feel uncomfortable with your sexuality?
What I mean here is you just don't know how to be you. You always compare yourself to some other guy or to other gal, and they look so comfortable in themselves, and you don't necessarily feel that same comfort level.
Okay. Number 10, do you feel you will never be a good enough person?
Yeah, that kind of speaks for itself.
Yeah.
Yeah. Number 11, are you quick to judge others?
And there is, if you're quick to judge others, you're probably pretty quick to judge yourself.
Yeah. If you're criticizing others, you're probably criticizing yourself.
Yeah.
Number 12, do you become defensive when you get criticism?
You get defensive because you're afraid people will see who you really are. And so you try to push them away by being defensive.
And the last one, number 13, are you depressed or angry in listening to all this?
Yeah, that's kind of a lighthearted question, but I think there's some truth to it because sometimes when people read these questions, it strikes a nerve and they don't want to admit their shame. So, yeah, I think that alone can show some shame in your heart.
Yeah, absolutely.
So on that quiz, even if you answer yes to one of them, that's
I think so.
shame. Okay.
Yeah, I think there's indication, of course, if you answer yes to all 13, definitely has some issues. But
yeah,
I think you have to factor in that we probably deny a few of those that we don't want to admit to. So if you answer to one of them, yes, there's probably 2 or 3 others that you should be saying yes to.
Yeah, I'm thinking so much about the quiz already. Oh my goodness. Well, that was a great quiz and it should give our listeners an idea if this is an issue that needs healing in them.
I think a quiz like that is helpful because it helps to identify something that I think most people would say, no, I don't have any problems with shame. But then when you go through the questions, you go, oh, maybe I do.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. You also talk about the lies we believe that are related to shame. And some of these are, I'm only valuable as a fill in the blank.
Yeah. Put there.
Yeah.
God has damned me. God is against me. God is punishing me. I have no future. Life will never be good again. I've dishonored my family and I'm rejected. Did you want to expound on those?
There are hundreds of lies that you could list out here if you wanted to. And I think it's really important for everyone to take these lies seriously, isolate them, write them down, pray about them, say, God, what are the lies that I'm believing? And then write them down and make it an active, intentional part of your life to bring those to God in prayer. Maybe every day, maybe throughout the day, and say, God, please help me to see me in the way that you see me. See, if you believe the lie that you're worthless, you're going to live out of that lie. And you're never going to succeed in your career or in your relationship or in life in general. And even if you do succeed, you'll probably try to sabotage it because you don't think that you deserve the success that you've achieved. So we all need to ask God to expose those lies that we believe and then help us to deal with them.
Yeah, I could see how that would all correlate when you're saying all that.
Yeah.
So I like what you said about how many people are not the problem in dealing with our shame. It is actually the lies we believe about ourselves that are the problem.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is so important because your past lies to you based on what you've done or what you failed to do or what's been done to you. And you can't change the past. So it's easy to feel hopeless about your life. But you can change how you view yourself. And that's where Jesus comes into play because he tells us that he can forgive our past and he can heal our wounds. He can fill us with the Spirit and he can transform our lives. You can be a new person. The past doesn't have to define who you are, but you have to reject the lies you've been believing all the time and accept this new paradigm that Jesus offers us.
Yeah, it's like what the Bible says is renewing your mind and focusing on having that truth in you. So you also say that people are part of the solution as we are wired for community and connection. So isolation only adds to our emotional pain. Did you want to discuss that any more about the connection?
Yeah, I think a few people have said that when you're hurt in community, you also find healing in community. The tendency is to run away and isolate, which protects us from further harm, but it doesn't solve our problem. So we need to get to the bottom of our hurt. And to do that, we need other people in our lives. I really appreciate Brenda Brown's work because she's done a lot of work around this idea of being willing to be vulnerable, being willing to expose our insecurities and lies that we believe. So when we bring all of that, all of these lies into the light, we expose this faulty thinking of ours, and we start to see the truth of how God sees us. But we have to be careful. We want to bring it into the light, and we do that through counselors and through safe people, but we want to be careful that they're safe people, because not everyone in our community is safe. So I just want to add that qualifier.
Yeah. Yeah, and that is true, because when I was going through a lot of healing, as I read this quiz, I noticed I struggled with a lot of those questions, but I really did stop believing the lies and speak the truth from the Word of God over those things. But it actually works, because then I don't believe that God thinks those things that I thought he believed during my marriage. I completely transformed my mind. You say that there are pain preventers we use to deal with shame. Some of those are manipulation, perfectionism, all or nothing behavior, procrastination, isolation, people pleasing, self-consciousness, compulsiveness, and making vows. Can you share a little more about that?
Yeah, that list is long, but it's really not as long as what I have in my book, because in my book, I listed out 30 different ways that we act out dysfunctionally because of our shame. In fact, I like the analogy, at least it works for me, is I compare it to a building contractor who gets out of their truck at the building site and they strap on their tool belt and they fill it up with all kinds of tools that they might need throughout the day so they don't have to keep running back to their truck. And that way, no matter what difficulty they come up against, all they have to do is reach into their tool belt and pull out the appropriate tool. And I think we're like that. We have an emotional tool belt that we strap on every morning that is full of faulty solutions to protect us from our shame. But it gets pretty exhausting, always looking for ways to dodge the pain of our shame. And like you mentioned, things like isolating and people-pleasing, procrastinating. A researcher, her name's Karen Horney, said that shame causes us to react in 3 ways. She said that 1, we move away from people, which means we withdraw and isolate. 2, we move towards people, meaning we try to please them. And 3, she says that we move against people in anger. So I think that was pretty insightful, just to simply understand the impact that shame has on us and how we will act dysfunctionally because of it.
Yeah, it's so huge. And we all have coping mechanisms that we developed that maybe as a child that helped us, but now as an adult, it's
right.
I've been realizing things of like, I can see why I needed that as a child, but now that's hurting me,
Yeah.
So you say in your book, there is no one response to the pain of shame. Every person handles shame in a different way. You say some things we do to kill the pain of shame are, and these are just a few: repression, suppression, rationalizing, minimizing. I think we all can do some of those. Or did you want to expound on those?
Sure. Well, in my book, I do go through each one of these and explain it in detail. But just for the 4 that you mentioned, for repression is really out of our control because it's something that comes from our subconscious mind. Our subconscious mind identifies painful things in the past that it just doesn't want to let us think about, so it represses them. So we talk about repressed memories. Suppression is something we do have control over. That's when we say, you can kind of tell someone just doesn't want to go there. I think every counselor has experienced that when they're talking to a client and they say, let's talk about your past, or let's talk about your parents, and that person diverts the conversation, or they just shut down or something. So they're suppressing their emotions and thoughts about whatever that pain is. And I think we're all experts at rationalizing and minimizing. I mean, to rationalize means that we always find a reason or excuse for our behavior because we're afraid of admitting our weakness. Simple things like always having an excuse for being late rather than just saying, I'm sorry for being late. It's a bad habit of mine and I'm going to start working on it. It's just easier to come up with a lame excuse.
Yeah.
Or minimizing, the same kind of thing. If we lessen our behavior by saying, well, everyone's doing this, or don't make such a big deal out of it. It's just much easier to say those things than saying, you know what I'm doing, it's wrong, no matter how small, and I shouldn't be doing it. It really is a big deal, and it's time for me to face up to it.
Yeah.
But shame-based people can't do those things. They can't be that honest because the pain of their shame is just too great. To admit a weakness takes them down a dark rabbit hole. At least that's what they're afraid of.
Yeah, and I like that you mentioned Brenda Brown, because I know, like, her TED Talk, she talks a lot about vulnerability and shame, and I've read a few of her books, and I think it's interesting because she's done so much research on it, and it's just very relatable when she talks about it. It's something that I think everyone could say they relate to some part of that.
Yeah, I really appreciate her work.
Yeah. So this is one thing that spoke to me in your book too. You said, this is what shame feels like. When you're being abused, it feels like I can hurt you because you are worthless. And what shame feels like when you're neglected is I can ignore you because you are worthless. Did you want to expound on that? I thought that was interesting. When I was listening to that, I had to stop and write it down. I was listening to your book on audio and I'm like, wow, that's
Sure.
really
Yeah, that's
insightful.
good. That is good.
Good. Yeah, well, that's how we interpret people's actions and start to believe a lie. So if someone hurts us or ignores us, we naturally attach a motive to their action. We assume that they don't value us, and then we own that as true. It becomes part of our identity. We let that assumption define us. But one thing to be careful about is in assigning motive to how people treat you. The truth might be that their behavior has nothing to do with you and everything to do with them. But too often we just, like I said, attach motive to what they're saying. So it's easy to internalize it and misinterpret their actions. For example, someone told me once how they felt terribly rejected when their parents failed to show up to pick them up one time when they were supposed to. But really what happened once they found out much later is that their parents were called away on an emergency just before they were going to pick up their child. And the child was with some good friends. So the parents knew that they were in a safe place. But the child, perceived that and attached bad motives to their parents. And I think if you do that too much, it can really foster your shame.
That's good.
Yeah. Yes.
Wow. If you're a victim of abuse, ridicule, or neglect, then shame is most likely attached itself to your identity. If your family has secrets or if you've experienced any kind of trauma, then shame may also have entered your psyche through these means. Can you share a little about why shame attaches to us so easily in those situations?
Sure. What you just mentioned, those are the 5 roots of shame I mentioned and talk quite a bit about in my book. And I think these things attach themselves so easily to us because we're all born with this thing called, the Bible calls sin. And sin isn't just bad behavior. In the Bible, sin is a condition. It's a condition that we're born into. So put simply, sin is falling short of God's perfection. We all feel that to varying degrees. We all sense that we can't rise to our best every second of every day. We all fall short. And we just sense that we're cracked pots. We're broken vessels in need of repair. So when we experience any of the 5 roots, the abuse, the ridicule, neglect, the secrets, or the trauma, we naturally assume that these bad things came because it's our fault. There's something wrong with us. We are the reasons that bad things are happening to us.
Yeah. So there's a difference between realizing that you sin and being able to repent of that and just labeling yourself as not being worthy, kind of like we were talking about at the beginning.
Yeah. I think everyone, even talking with non-Christians, they'll admit that they're not perfect. Yeah. And when I try to explain sin, I go, well, that's what sin is. I mean, there's the sin you do, but then there's this condition where you're not like God. And I think people go, oh, well, yeah, no one's like God. Oh, absolutely. But I think we feel that, and some more than others, and it affects us.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm really sensitive. I noticed there's certain pastors that can come across shameful in their messages because I've noticed me being aware because I am sensitive to that one because I want to be convicted of my sin, but there's sometimes you feel shamed, and maybe that's not intent, but it comes across like shaming, which to me,
I know because I used to be that pastor.
Really?
when I was young, I came out of a shame-based background. And shame people. I was shamed growing up, and I naturally shamed people. I'd have to think about what really changed me. But yeah, I know what it's like to be on both ends of the spectrum, and I'm super sensitive to that now.
Yeah, I think you shared a little bit about that on the first podcast you did with us.
So most abusers feel shame, so they shame you.
Yeah.
Okay, and that's okay, makes sense.
Yeah, if you don't have that self-awareness and just doing it. So you share a story in your book about a scene from your childhood that you used. I thought this was a good example of shame. I mean, it was funny. It made me laugh out loud, but it was also just that sense it really expounded on it a little bit about how shame works. So you explained how your father let you have mixed drinks as a kid. And as children, we don't have a way to know if that's normal, if that's unhealthy or what. As a child, you don't really understand that. So you said that when the drinks were ready, you proclaimed to everyone in the backyard, the gin and tonics are ready. And this made me laugh because I could just see as a child that just being an innocent thing that you said, but then your father was like, shh, like don't say that to everyone, So that was like a secret that you had unintentionally exposed to anyone that was around. Did you want to share a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, I still laugh about when I think about it because I just yelled out as loud as I could in the neighborhood, the gin and tonics are ready.
I know that just
and my dad was so he was like white on rice. He was just like, "What are you doing? Don't do that." But I think every family can relate to this because we all have secrets. That was kind of depending upon your view. I was going to say it was kind of small, but I suppose it can be kind of big too in terms of alcohol. But, some secrets are huge. I mean, there might be adultery going on. There might be incest going on. There could be some smaller things. But as a kid, like you said, you don't know their secrets there. That's just normal life. I mean, your parents might be drug dealers, but you thought that was normal until you saw a movie about drug dealers getting arrested on TV or something.
Yeah.
And then the lights get turned on and you see that your family is wrong about something. But at that moment, that's when the shame can come in because you think, wow, my family is really messed up. And if they're messed up, that means I'm messed up. Mm-hmm. So there it is. Shame comes in.
Yeah. And I think a lot, if you had like alcohol, any kind of alcoholism in your family, like a parent that goes along with that.
Yeah. That makes it hard for my family, my kids, because they grew up in an abusive home, so they don't know what normal is at all.
Right.
Not at all. So you share the importance of knowing the truth about yourself and your identity.
Mm-hmm.
Remember who you are. Number 1, you were created by God. Number 2, you are loved by God. Number 3, you are accepted by God. Number 4, you are forgiven by God. You mentioned that you had sold drugs in your past and you had gotten clean from that offense. Number 5, you are approved by God. Number 6, you are filled by God. And number 7, you will be transformed by God.
Yeah.
Did you want to expound on each of those?
Sure. Why don't I just walk you through them? The first one, you're created by God. That's, it's such a simple and fundamental truth. But I used to teach this in a treatment center all the time to people recovering from addiction. And I said, if you could grab a hold of just this one truth. I mean, I've got 7 things here that I want you to know, but if you could just grab a hold onto this one truth that you were created by God, it could be so transformative. It's impossible for God to make anything that's not inherently valuable. So if we can get a hold of the fact and remember that we therefore must be inherently valuable just simply because God made us.
Yeah.
We might do some bad things, but at our core, there's something that was created by God.
Yeah.
So that's the first thing. The second thing, and it flows right out of the first one, is that you are loved by God. I think it's just a truth that we love what we create. And if you're a parent, you can relate to that. You love your kids partly just because you created them. It came from you.
Yeah.
And so for the people that struggle with wondering if God loves them, I would say, well, if he created you, trust me, he loves you because he loves everything he creates.
Mm-hmm.
One objection I had, though, from a young lady one time in the treatment center was she said, well, I know God loves me because he has to love me, but I don't think he likes me. So that's why there used to just be 6 points, but I added this number 3 here. You're accepted by God, meaning he likes us too. He doesn't just love us. He likes us. He would want to hang out with us. He would want to be with us because, well, again, he created us and there's something deep inside each of us that he values and loves. So we don't have to worry that he doesn't like us.
That's good.
Yeah. Number 4, that you're forgiven. When I was arrested for drugs, I learned a new word because when I got to the end and they said that they were going to expunge my record, and I didn't know what that meant. So I had to go look it up. But to have your record expunged means your crime is taken off the record. It is as if you had never done it before.
Yeah.
And so if someone does a background check on you, they're not going to find that. And that's what God did for us. He expunged our record. And so when he looks at us, and this is a simple truth, but it's hard for people to get a hold of this, that when God looks at us, if we've asked for his forgiveness and if we've trusted in Jesus that he died for us, when he looks at us, he doesn't see any of our sin because it's been washed. That's what Jesus accomplished on the cross, that he dealt with that sin.
Yeah.
And so that should be so freeing. If I could go on for a long time about this, but one of my books, I targeted that very point. If you struggle with knowing that you're forgiven by God, I have it's my smallest book. It's a quick read, but it's called Starting Over. And I just address how you can be sure that you're forgiven by God. So that's number 4. Number 5, you're approved by God. And that's kind of my way of translating what the Bible calls being made righteous. In other words, not only are we forgiven and cleansed from our past, which that alone is good news, but God sees us as perfect in Christ. That's kind of what I was just alluding to. Once we're forgiven, he sees us as perfect. And this is really, if you think about it, something that got me down this whole lane of understanding God's perspective was years ago. I read in a book on shame, and it said that when God looks at you, he sees you just as perfect as Jesus.
Yeah.
And at first that was like, I don't know, it felt like blasphemy. But how could he say that? But as I thought about it, I thought, well, if he's cleansed me of all my sin, yeah, I guess I am perfect in his eyes. And so, I know that's really hard for some people to accept, but it's a wonderful truth. And that just shows you the power of the gospel.
Yeah, definitely being able to take that in, especially if you had like a parent that you didn't feel loved by, because I know I struggled with this. Like, if you didn't feel real loved by your dad or something, then you think God the Father, it's hard you translate that almost over to God.
Yeah. Well, really the opposite thinking of one of the questions in that shame quiz that do you always feel like God is judging you? And it's just the opposite. If you've been forgiven by God, you are perfect in his sight, and judging you is the last thing on his mind. So 2 more things. One, number 6 is you're filled by God. And that's simply saying that not only have you been forgiven, forgiveness is part of the past, but now God gives you something to move into your future, and that is his spirit. So he fills you with his spirit to heal you and then to move you to be a part of his kingdom, to be used by God, and that he can use you to touch other people's lives. So that's pretty exciting. And then finally, number 7 is really just a summary that's saying you will be transformed by God. If you can remember these things, if you can walk in these truths that I just mentioned, then you will be transformed by God. And that's what he wants for us.
Yeah, it is so important to believe the truth and to go through those. That's part of healing.
Yeah.
And I was born with a deformity on my right toes. And it's interesting because I just went through some EMDR, and there was a lot of shame when I was a kid because I got made fun of a lot by all my dad, brothers and sisters, neighbors, because I was the only one that had anything wrong with me. So they didn't mean to do it. They were just kids. But as a child myself, I couldn't, even as a baby came out. And so dealing with those issues, as I was doing the EMDR, I felt that love of God. And then came to my mind, there's a verse in Song of Solomon, and it says, how beautiful are your sandaled feet. Oh, daughter, how beautiful are your feet in sandals. Like, it just blew me away because I remember reading that a long time ago and crying. And then that came back into my mind because he cared enough to put something like that where that would maybe not mean anything to very many women, but to me, that meant so much. It's like, you saying God sees us as perfect. He loves my feet, but I had to deal with a lot of shame of other people and had to process all that. So I just thought I'd add that in because Song of Solomon, even the next thing are like your rounded thighs are like jewels. Like if we could dig deep into Song of Solomon, we might, all the women that are critical of their bodies and everything could take a verse out and go, oh, he loves me just the way I am. He sees me as perfect and I don't need to change anything. And I just
that's that
in there. Yeah.
That's precious. Thanks for sharing that.
Very personal to me. So it makes me cry when I see that verse in there.
Yeah.
So
it's interesting how God can take a just one simple verse like that and breathe life into it and be so life changing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think
I'm glad you mentioned EMDR because I was going to mention that there's kind of a Christian. Well, I think there's a number of Christian versions of inner healing. My wife has a ministry that she works with people, but so it's one thing just to say you need to think right. You need to transform your mind, but for a lot of people, it's hard. It's really hard to change the way you think about something. And I think for many of us, we need like a spiritual surgery. And so there's various inner healing prayer kind of ministries that walk people through and help them with God's spirit to release those different things. So it's kind of like spiritual surgery. So I just want to mention that for your listeners, that just quoting Bible verses, for some, that might be all you need. But for others, you might need to take this deeper into some deeper form of prayer ministry.
Yeah. And it was all spiritually based EMDR because it's based off of my beliefs or the Bible. So the truths that I had to believe about myself were all biblically based. So yeah, it transformed. But even before I did that, I was speaking the truth over myself with those verses, and God was breaking the lies off even before that. But now I've even had more healing. So
that's great.
Yeah, I was going to say, as women, I think men, I'm sure men probably struggle with that too, but we are being bombarded with the opposite. Like you're saying, like when it comes to body image, we're getting bombarded of, oh, this is how you're supposed to look.
Yep.
So it's like we constantly have to, if you're on social media at all or watch, just in the world, you're just getting bombarded with that. So if you're not counteracting that, if that's all you're filling yourself up with these images that are not real, then you're going to have to really, almost do a fast from that to heal, to be able to renew and see your body is perfectly and wonderfully made.
Well, and that's what's hard about my type of deformity. There's no plastic surgery, nothing I can do to change it or fix it. So it is something I have to know God sees as beautiful, and he clearly showed me that.
Right. Yeah. The people all sizes and shapes are beautiful. It's like the world says, have to be the certain way, but that's not what God says.
Absolutely.
So just in closing, Jesus not only experienced shame, but absorbed it for us. And that's helped me too, to meditate on that and just realize that Jesus experienced shame and he identifies with me in it. That's not something foreign to him. So I just want to thank you so much for coming to talk about this important topic. It's such an important topic to talk about. So where can our listeners find your books? And if you want to share your social media, we're going to have a link in our show notes to your website, which is readingremy.com. But if you want to share where they can find you on social media.
Yeah. So readingremy.com is my website. I'm on Facebook. I have an author page. Then I have a personal page too. So you might find me two places there. I've got a YouTube channel. I've got a number of short videos on this topic that we talked about, and a lot on my other main book is Broken Trust, where I talk about spiritual abuse. And then all my books are available on Amazon, whether paperback, Kindle, or a few of them, 3 of them are on audiobook. I think you mentioned that you're listening to this book on audio.
Yeah, I did.
And we already did the podcast on Broken Trust, and that was really downloaded. People love that podcast, Remy.
Oh, good. That's good to hear.
Absolutely. So I'm pretty sure this one's going to be, you're just awesome.
Yeah, you explain things, break it down well.
Yeah.
Oh, good. I appreciate that. You never know.
And
but the reviews on my books are very kind, so I appreciate that.
Another one where we have a testimony on shame with Kimberly, and so yours just going to expound on explaining shame, which is great. Good. I think it was one of our first podcasts. So we really haven't covered shame in depth.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for being on the podcast. This was incredible.
Yes. Thank you so much. I appreciate you.
Thank you, Brenda, Karen. I appreciate being online here with you.
Yeah. So I was actually really encouraged when I took your, excuse me, something in my throat. Oh. So
I'm editing this week.
I know.
Well, I do the editing. It's okay.
Sorry, Brenda. Oh.
Go ahead.
You want a drink of water and say it again?
I don't know what is going on with
Thanks for tuning in to Hanging On to Hope. Check out our website, hangingontohope.org. There are resources on there, and if you would like to donate or volunteer, you can do that through our website. We are a brand new nonprofit, so we appreciate any and all support. And we thank you for listening. And until next time, keep hanging on to hope. We are evidence that there is hope and healing for you, and our passion is to help you find it too. So thanks for tuning in.
Thanks for listening, everyone.